Let's see. John in Commerce. Hey, John, welcome.
Hey, Bob.
Hey.
Hey, I have a comment. I want to talk about the Ukraine situation.
Okay.
I think a lot of Americans don't know that Putin, I don't see what better alternative he had. I feel his hand was forced by the U.S., basically. And this has been discussed by people like Henry Kissinger, John Mearsheimer. People are saying, years back, they're saying he's going to have to react violently. He's going to have to invade Ukraine if we keep doing this. And now he's done it. So there's three major reasons, I think, that have led to this point. So the first is that the U.S. overthrew the elected government in 2014 and installed a government that was very hostile to Moscow. So, I would call it the most blatant and obvious coup ever, because 2 weeks before it happened, WikiLeaks released an intercepted phone call between Victoria Nuland, who was the Assistant Secretary of State under Obama, and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. And they described who they wanted in the leadership of the Ukrainian government. This is before the coup happened. So 2 weeks later, a violent coup, many people killed. Yanukovych has to flee, and they put in their guy. And now they
Are you talking about Poroshenko, or are you talking about Zelensky?
Poroshenko.
Okay.
And he wants, NATO membership, and then of course all these weapons are pouring in. So it's if you just have a little empathy with Putin, you say, if we had a hostile military alliance, a government overthrown in Canada or Mexico and install super hostile to the U.S. government, and heavy weapons are pouring in, we would freak out, rightly so. So that's one reason. The other reason, another reason is...
Before you go to your second reason, can I just deal with that first one? I'm not seeing that as a justification for Vladimir Putin to go into Ukraine. To me, I don't see that as, he has to go in. First of all, as far as heavy weapons going in, they weren't that heavy. We weren't sending Javelin tank-busting missiles at the time. Trump started approving them, but the Obama-Biden administration wasn't approving them. And frankly, just because Ukraine happens to align itself more with the United States and starts building up a stronger military, I don't agree with you that puts Putin in a position where he has no choice to do that. No, Ukraine is still a separate sovereign nation, and that doesn't entitle Putin to take them over just because Putin doesn't like how potentially militarily strong they may be becoming. I can't agree with that forces his hand.
Well, what you said the heavy weaponry did come in under Trump, right? So they didn't react immediately, right? They hoped that it could be resolved. But the heavy weaponry started coming in under Trump. And you said they're a sovereign nation. They can do whatever they want. They're not a sovereign nation. The elected government was overthrown violently by the U.S., and a Nazi-sympathetic government was installed. So, which leads to the second point.
Okay, well, and I'm not sure that I completely agree with you there. I do agree with you that there's a whole boatload of corruption that was involved, and Poroshenko was also extremely corrupt as well. And I think that Zelensky was trying to clean up the corruption. But either way, I don't see this as justification for Putin taking it over. But what's your second point?
Okay, the second point was just to say that government is fascist and Nazi sympathetic. So there's two Oliver Stone documentaries you could check out: Ukraine on Fire and Revealing Ukraine, which are becoming harder to find online as the censorship is really ramping up like I've never seen before. And so the people in the eastern regions of Ukraine are ethnic Russians, and they protested the coup, right? And when they did that, the fascist elements were extremely violent with them. They herded dozens of protesters into a building and lit the building on fire, and then people would jump from the window, and when they did, the fascists would beat them to death. You can watch this all. So what happened, that led to the eastern part saying, okay, that's it. We're separating from Ukraine. You threw out the president we elected. You put in this Nazi sympathizer, and we're getting – and so for the last 8 years, people think this war started – just this month. This war has been going on since 2014. 14,000 people have been killed in the eastern regions of Ukraine, and that's another reason for Putin to say, these are our brothers and sisters. They speak Russian, and by the way, the Nazi government was looking to ban Russian, the language, from public spaces, it was going to be illegal to use it. This is the native language for 1 out of every 3 Ukrainians. So that's the second reason.
Okay, and by the way, and let me just say before you go on to number three, okay, none of that still tells me that, okay, therefore Vladimir Putin has no choice but to go in there. Even if you had somebody in government leadership who was a Nazi sympathizer or sympathetic to Nazi causes, and quite frankly, I don't want to automatically take that at face value, but let's pretend that that was the case, okay? So what? That doesn't mean that Vladimir Putin now has a right to take over that country, to annex it, and to basically absorb it into Russia and make it part of Russia, to try to rebuild his old Soviet Union. I don't care how ugly the views of Poroshenko or any of the original leadership of Ukraine is. It is irrelevant to me. That doesn't give Vladimir Putin the right to take them over. And especially now, okay, with Zelensky in there. So you think that's a justifiable reason? Okay, fine. I don't. No. But what's your third point?
Well, let me say, that's not what I'm saying. I agree. If they just had Nazi sympathetic views, that's not it. What I'm saying is there is a Nazi battalion that is now part of the Ukrainian military under Poroshenko that came about. They are mass murdering. They are mass murdering these people, the ethnic Russians. They're hostile to Russians, and they have been, that violence has basically taken over the government now. And so, like I said, it's an official Nazi unit of their military is now part of the military thanks to Poroshenko, and they're killing all these people. And I don't see how it can be stopped, because Russia, they had Minsk agreements where we're going to have a peaceful resolution to this thing. And he's been waiting 8 years for Ukraine to implement that, and they refuse to do it. So he's just finally said they're never going to stop killing these people until they're completely gone. And so how else do you stop it?
Okay, you know what? No, who says it's his job to stop it? And that's on the assumption that the Nazi influence is as strong as you're believing that it is. Maybe it's every bit as strong as you're believing it is, or maybe you've bought some Kool-Aid from Putin and it's not nearly as strong as you're saying it is. I don't know which, okay? And I'm not going to try to determine that right now. But what I'm saying is, even if it was every bit as strong as you're saying it is, it's not Putin's job to do that, okay? Why doesn't Putin go in then? It's nobody's job, okay? It's up to the people in Ukraine. No, then for that matter, why don't we just decide that we don't like okay, look what they're doing. Look at the fascist things they're doing in Canada right now. Justin Trudeau, he's gone extremely fascist in Canada, denying people's rights and freedoms, okay? So does that mean that the United States now has a green light to go ahead and just militarily take over Canada and increase the size of the United States and take down the Canadian flag, put up the U.S. flag? They're now part of Canada. And then the argument is, well, if we don't do it, who's going to do it? Well, nobody. Okay, it's nobody's job to do that. Okay, so
Trudeau killed 10,000 truckers. If he was shelling truckers for 8 years.
I'm not automatically assuming that you're right about the people that have been killed there. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is, I do not see this as a justification for Vladimir Putin to say, "Oh, I guess I have no choice but to take over Ukraine." Yes, he does. Yes, he does. He doesn't have to take over Ukraine. He's choosing to do it because he wants to rebuild the old Soviet Union. That's what he wants to do.
The reason he's doing it is because it is an existential threat to him. Now, you can right or wrong is not the issue. The issue is,
well, I think it is.
If it does, I'm just saying. And
I'm going to give you a few more seconds on this, and then I got to be, because to be honest with you, I want to talk with other callers too. I want to be fair to them, and I can't turn this into the Bob and John show. And so you've got point one, and then a whole bunch of things you want to talk about point one, and then point two, and a whole bunch of and it's like that's not fair to everybody else. So you've given me the first two reasons. Call me next Friday and hit me with reason number three, okay? But I got to move on. John, I appreciate your call. Thank you very much. And folks, we'll take more of your Free for All Friday calls next. 877-8282.
Weapons of mass destruction to actually invade and obliterate Iraq. As far as that's a part of the question I'm going to ask you, what is the threshold that you believe should be met in order, especially in light of the fact that Russia went in and surgically removed these bioweapons labs that are now coming to light? And also, he has said For 15 years, Putin has said, I will not bow the knee to NATO and allow these ICBMs to be installed on our border, because we know where those ICBMs are aimed at. And there is no time for Russia to react if that, in fact, occurs, if they decide to put a nuclear warhead on those weapons. So as far as what is the actual threshold, and it is an existential threat in Putin's mindset, apparently. And again, I'm not defending Putin as a leader. He's a dictator thug that is, he kills his enemies. But in this case, the West and America can use the justification of obliterating Iraq, on all levels, the infrastructure and everything, based on a false bioweapons or mass destruction, weapon. And here it is, Russia is, in effect, doing the same thing in a more gentle manner, a more surgical manner. And, in the ICBM thing, that
honestly,
the threshold that needs to be met.
I'll tell you the big difference. Let me just say, because you say threshold, but let me just, to me, I don't think Iraq is a good analogy for this, and here's why. If we go back to the situation with Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction, all right, first of all, contextually, we've got to remember this was right after 9/11. Okay, so immediately after 9/11, suddenly we had to pay much closer attention to nations who could be cozy with terrorists. Saddam Hussein was cozy with terrorists. He was allowing terrorists to operate inside of Iraq, and so that was a more dangerous. Suddenly, he took on way more danger in our minds than he did before, because we saw how vulnerable we were after 9/11. Add to that the issue of weapons of mass destruction. We got to remember, we can't revise history here. Saddam Hussein did, in fact, have huge stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction. He inventoried them, and the United Nations inventoried them, so we knew that they were there. The question wasn't whether or not he had weapons of mass destruction. The question was, did he still have them by the time we went into Iraq? Or did he get rid of them? Did he bury them? Did he destroy them? Did he ship them to Syria or someplace else? Or were they still there? The problem is Democrats and the media have revised history and now turned it into there were no weapons of mass destruction. No, there were, and there were large stockpiles. We just didn't find the large stockpiles when we got in there, and we don't know how he got rid of them, if he shipped them somewhere else or if he destroyed them, or we just don't know. But my point is that at the time of the Iraq War, when you have all 17 U.S. intelligence agencies and the intelligence agencies of our allies like Great Britain and others that are saying, we see Saddam Hussein as a danger and a threat, and we believe that he is going to use chemical weapons. And so therefore, he has them and he's going to use them. And there comes a point where it's like, okay, we just got hit by 9/11. I can understand that argument that says we need to go in and take him out. And that's why Democrats joined Republicans to say we need to do this, including Hillary Clinton and all the rest of them. So we can look at it after the fact and say we didn't find the stockpiles. Was it really worth it going in? In hindsight, would we be better just leave Saddam Hussein in power? Maybe. But at the time, it was a different circumstance. And I guess I just can't necessarily equate that with Vladimir Putin saying, I don't want ICBMs pointed at me. Well, guess what? He's got ICBMs pointed at our NATO allies and ourselves. So why shouldn't our NATO allies be allowed to point them back? So
I agree with that.
The only way to handle him is with strength, it seems to me.
Well, see, I'm not trying to reconcile Iraq with this. I know it's much more nuanced with that.
Sure.
Even if you go way back to '62 and the whole Cuban Missile Crisis, that was what they perceived as
And just so you know, we only got less than 30 seconds left, so I'm just giving you a heads up.
Well, I'm just going to give the last point. You had a female caller a couple callers ago, and another thing Putin has suggested over the years is that he will never again take a knee to the globalists. When I say globalist, I mean that in the broad sense. And the likes of George Soros. You got to find it interesting. In fact, I would even submit to you that it should be a red flag to the West that we are on the same footing as people like George Soros. And if that doesn't that not raise a red flag to you, it should raise a red flag. And we always hear these things about, and there is a they hate each other, obviously. But anyway, that's just a comment.
It depends. It depends on what the situation is. If George Soros says the sky is blue, then I'm going to say, hey, I'm with George Soros on that. So it depends on what things we're with him on and what things we're not with him on. That's where the devil's in the details. We'd have to get to specifics about what it is about George Soros. But unfortunately, I look at the clock and I don't have